A siren wailed in the distance, its sharp howl cracking through the humid evening air like the omen of something devastating. On the sidewalk across from the smoldering remains of a small brick building, a group of people huddled behind an emergency services barrier, phones raised like shields against the confusion. One man's voice trembled in a shaky home video clip that would soon go viral. "He's in there! He set the place on fire, locked them all inside." I can't believe what I just saw. The camera zoomed on the blackening silhouettes of windows as thick plumes of dark smoke poured out, backlit by furious orange flames. Witnesses would later say they saw him sprint across the parking lot, a jug in one hand, a lighter flicking in the other, eyes lit with a kind of rage nobody around here had ever witnessed. It felt personal, not random. There was nothing random about the methodical way he doused the front lobby floor, or how he glanced upward at the second-story windows before setting it all ablaze. Within days, that shaky clip ran on every local station, accompanied by looped voiceover from a frenetic news anchor. Authorities have identified the suspect in the alleged arson at the Aspenwood Therapy Clinic that left 2 dead and multiple others injured. Sources say this shocking crime was motivated by intense jealousy, spurred by the suspect's discovery of his wife's affair with her own therapist. The story exploded across social media as a cautionary tale about boundaries, secrets, and the horrifying escalation of betrayal. But beneath the viral headlines lay a deeper tapestry of raw emotions, compromised ethics, broken trust, and the chain reaction that ended in flames. Even while the ashes still settled, the public demanded answers, and the investigation soon unraveled the painfully human tragedy behind the gruesome event. Months earlier, behind the unremarkable white picket fence of a tree-lined street, Ethan Caldwell would never have guessed that his life was primed for implosion. Neighbors described him as stable, methodical, a steady presence they saw leaving for the office each morning and returning around sunset. In archived social media photos from simpler days, he grins beside his wife Juliana Caldwell, clinking glasses at a local vineyards weekend festival. You can trace the strain around her eyes in the later photos, though. Something off in the forced way she leans in for group pictures, always maintaining a polite, practiced smile. They had a comfortable home with neat landscaping, the barest hints of normal suburban friction, an overfilled mailbox, a squeaky gate hinge, the occasional untrimmed hedge. Nothing that would suggest the high-octane meltdown that was soon to come. But behind that meticulously cultivated veneer, they were struggling. Juliana's mother had died, leaving her emotionally adrift, and Ethan's job had become more demanding, forcing him into late nights that eroded their once close relationship. Fights simmered beneath the surface about money, about her quiet sadness, about his inability to offer genuine support, and about the intangible space that seemed to grow between them, no matter how often they said, "I love you." In one of her last attempts to salvage her mental health, Juliana sought therapy at the newly opened Aspenwood Clinic, an upscale mental health practice that promised discreet counseling, cutting-edge treatments, and a warm environment. Insurance only covered a portion of the cost, but Ethan insisted it was worth it if it could help her come to terms with her grief. Juliana's assigned therapist was Dr. Marcus Roth, known for his charismatic approach, blending mindfulness with unconventional therapeutic methods. Officially, Dr. Roth was lauded for his empathetic listening and brilliant emotional intelligence, but whispers circulated among a handful of patients, rumors that he blurred lines, that he sometimes developed overly personal bonds under the guise of advanced therapy. Nothing had ever been proven. Some praised him as a miracle worker, especially in unraveling complex anxiety and depression cycles. Others said he was a shapeshifter, too skilled at playing savior while ironically feeding a codependent dynamic. Dr. Roth said I should keep a journal of every negative thought, Juliana once confided to her friend Loren, a snippet captured in a text message that was eventually pulled by investigators. He wants me to trust him with everything. Reading that text in isolation didn't raise many eyebrows. After all, trust is essential for therapy to be effective. But looking back, Loren recalled a chill that crept over her the moment Juliana explained how the sessions had started moving beyond conventional boundaries. "We talk about spiritual alignment, about my childhood secrets, about my hidden fantasies," she'd said. He's just so kind. Makes me feel so understood. Ethan, for his part, was busy traveling for work at least once or twice a month, hardly aware that these sessions were intensifying, becoming an almost daily fixture in Juliana's life. His mental image of therapy was a quiet office, a small couch, some breathing exercises, maybe the occasional prescription. He knew she carried an undercurrent of guilt she couldn't shake, especially after losing her mother and failing to be there in the final moments. He assumed the therapy was working well enough, judging by the fleeting glimpses of hope he saw in her eyes after sessions. He had no idea how dark that labyrinth was becoming. It took an unsettling dream for Juliana to first question her attachment to Dr. Roth. She dreamt they were locked in a small room, a flickering fluorescent light overhead, and he was whispering personal confessions into her ear, his own darkest secrets. Upon waking, she felt that now familiar tangle of confusion. Was Roth just a mentor, or was he something more? She tried to push away those thoughts, telling herself that intense, emotional connections in therapy could happen, especially when exploring traumatic memories. Yet, day by day, session by session, lines blurred. If therapy was supposed to be objective, her heart didn't get the memo. "You've got to trust your gut," Loren told her on a phone call. "Make sure everything stays professional." Juliana responded, "He's helping me, okay? I'm finally getting over my mom's death. I'm not alone in this." She clutched that narrative like a raft in a stormy sea of uncertainties. Meanwhile, Dr. Roth would reassure her, "You're making incredible strides. Don't let anyone question the value of this progress." When she mentioned Ethan's late nights at work, Dr. Roth offered gentle suggestions to communicate her needs. But there were also subtle shifts in his language, moments when he let slip that he found her admirable, even inspirational. When she cried, he offered not just tissues but a strong, lingering hug. As emotional intimacy grew, something in her awakened that had been dormant for too long. Dr. Roth knew the professional line, but he also seemed to thrive on the emotional charge. By the time anything physical happened, Juliana was already completely enmeshed. Mornings found her buzzing with excitement for her next session. Nights found her lying awake imagining how Dr. Roth would interpret her dreams. Ethan remained painfully clueless, focusing on job deadlines and telling himself that, with consistent therapy, she'd eventually find her footing again. He only noticed small changes. She wore perfume more often, started dressing up a bit before therapy sessions, seemed evasive when he asked about the details of her time in Roth's office. One night, he pressed her. "What's going on? Are you improving?" She nodded, eyes darting from the floor to his face, and answered, "Yes, I think so," before shutting herself in the bathroom. In the back of his mind, he sensed that tension was building, but he attributed it to unresolved grief or dissatisfaction with their marriage. The concept of an affair, especially one with a therapist, felt ludicrous. Perhaps a fleeting, self-protective denial was at play. He told himself he was just stressed, that he should probably schedule a session or two of therapy himself, but never followed through. It all might have gone on indefinitely, if not for a few small missteps. Dr. Roth's staff noticed strange scheduling patterns, last-minute appointments that weren't documented in the official calendar, extended sessions that bled into after hours. The clinic's cleaning lady, Marta, admitted later that she sensed something off one evening when she stayed late. "I heard low voices behind a locked door," she said in a trembling voice on the witness stand. "It sounded very intimate." Yet in a world where mental health confidentiality is paramount, staff members rarely question the boundaries unless it's glaringly obvious. So the rumors floated like phantoms, swirling but unconfirmed. Meanwhile, Aspenwood's marketing soared, and Dr. Roth gained even more popularity among the city's well-heeled clients. More people were singing his praises than ever before. When the affair between Juliana and Dr. Roth finally crossed that threshold, it happened in the therapy room itself, a space ironically designed to promote healing. She came in distraught one afternoon, weighed down by guilt and by Ethan's mounting frustration at home. She sobbed out that she was a burden to everyone in her life. He took her hands, gazed into her eyes with an intensity that felt transcendent in that moment, and whispered, "You're not a burden. You deserve real love." The next thing she knew, His lips met hers, and she clung to him, half out of desperation, half out of a swirling confusion that was heartbreak and desire in equal measure. The official notes from that session read as if it had been a standard talk therapy appointment. In reality, they shattered every ethical boundary in the textbook. From that day forward, the relationship turned into a private vortex of hidden texts and clandestine evening meetups. As the weeks marched on, any illusions of a strictly professional rapport evaporated. Juliana's therapy sessions were now laced with the taboo thrill of stolen touches and urgent confessions about how she felt trapped in her marriage but couldn't leave Ethan outright. Dr. Roth, who had built a career on guiding others, found himself rationalizing the glaring conflict of interest, telling himself that love knew no constraints, that they had a genuine, if unethical, soul connection. It was inevitable that Ethan would eventually notice how often she came home late from therapy. Perhaps the biggest giveaway was her phone's sudden shift to password protection, a detail that gnawed at him late at night. One Sunday morning, he attempted to pick up her phone from the dining table while she was in the shower, only to see the lock screen flash with a name that made his stomach drop. Marcus. The text preview read, "Can't stop thinking about Friday." That was all he needed. Curiosity stabbed through him. He tried to guess her new passcode, but after a few failed attempts, the phone locked him out for 10 minutes. During that window of forced inactivity, his mind spiraled. Could it be the therapist? Was he reading too much into a single text? The possibility alone ignited a dull rage in his chest. He pictured Dr. Roth's polished smile, the gentle voice that was supposed to heal. Had he dared to cross that boundary with his own wife? The phone eventually unlocked, but Juliana emerged from the shower before Ethan could make another move. Her quizzical glance at his uneasy posture likely tipped her off, but neither said a word. That silence was the beginning of a silent countdown, ticking away the remains of their already fraught relationship. Friends recall seeing them together at a casual backyard barbecue around that time. One friend, Devin, gave a statement to a local reporter after the incident. "I knew something was wrong." Juliana was anxious, kept checking her phone. Ethan was practically glaring at her. She tried to laugh it off whenever we teased them about marriage woes, but there was a tension you could cut with a knife. Another friend, Nicole, told the media that Ethan seemed more withdrawn, like a man carrying a secret he didn't know how to handle. He looked at Dr. Roth's name tag on a conversation we had about local professionals, flinched like he'd touched a live wire, and then changed the subject. The swirl of suspicion and denial kept building, a dam about to burst. The final push came through a phone call Ethan never meant to overhear. Late one night, Juliana stepped out onto their porch to speak in hushed tones. Ethan remained inside, listening through the open window. "I can't keep lying," Juliana's voice quivered. "You said you'd help me figure out how to tell him." "I can't keep coming to the clinic like this." There was a long pause. Ethan could almost hear Dr. Roth's reply through her reaction. She nodded vigorously, tears rolling down her cheeks, and responded, "I know. I want to be with you too." "I'm scared." Ethan froze in place, blood pounding in his ears. In that moment, everything he suspected coalesced into a bleak certainty. That night, he barely slept, consumed by alternating waves of heartbreak, fury, and an unsettling sense of betrayal by someone who was supposed to uphold professional ethics. He told himself he'd confront both of them, that they needed to face the damage they were doing, but confrontation is rarely neat and controlled, and in Ethan's case, it took a horrifying turn when heartbreak fused with unbridled rage. He tried to do the right thing at first in a controlled environment. He booked a surprise couples therapy session at Aspenwood with a different counselor, specifically requesting Dr. Roth to introduce them to whomever would handle their marital issues. Ethan wanted to see the man, look him in the eye, gauge his reaction in a setting he couldn't easily escape. Juliana, cornered by the suggestion, stammered that maybe they should pick a different clinic, but Ethan insisted. "We're using your insurance coverage, right?" He told her. It's easiest to stay with the same place. Through a colleague, he managed to coordinate a last-minute appointment after usual clinic hours. The stage was set. The day of the session, Juliana received a frantic text from Dr. Roth. "What is this about? You didn't tell me your husband was coming here." She responded that she'd been trapped, that Ethan sprang this on her. Dr. Roth tried to keep his composure, but his mind reeled. How was he supposed to face them both without his transgressions being laid bare? That evening, the atmosphere at the clinic was tense. The administrative staff had mostly gone home, leaving only a skeleton crew. The designated couples counselor was a soft-spoken woman in her 60s. Dr. Lorna Price. "I'm glad you two could come in," she said warmly. "We're just waiting on Dr. Roth for a quick referral handoff, as I understand." She glanced at Ethan, who offered a forced smile. Juliana gripped the arms of her chair so tightly her knuckles whitened. A minute later, Dr. Roth stepped in, wearing his usual air of calm professionalism, except there was a flicker of panic behind his eyes. "I'm so sorry to be running late," he said, projecting an air of courtesy. Ethan stared him down, noticing the beads of sweat forming at Dr. Roth's temples. "It's no problem," Dr. Price assured him, but Ethan let the silence hang, a silent challenge. Dr. Roth cleared his throat and offered a bland explanation about how Juliana's therapy history might inform their marital work, deftly skating around the elephant in the room. The tension crackled like static electricity. Dr. Price took a few notes, then said, "Well, I'll let the two of you begin by expressing what brings you here." She turned to Ethan. "You go first." In a clipped tone, Ethan said, "We're having problems, trust issues, communication issues. Something's been going on behind my back, and I think Dr. Roth knows all about it." Dr. Roth swallowed, opening his mouth as if to respond, but no words came out. Juliana's face reddened. She whispered, "Ethan, can we please do this privately first?" He locked eyes with her. "Privately? When you've been doing everything behind closed doors?" Dr. Price's brow furrowed in confusion. "I'm not following." Ethan cut her off. "I found out everything about their little therapeutic process." He spat those words like poison. In the uncomfortable silence that followed, Dr. Roth excused himself, claiming he had to handle an urgent administrative matter. Dr. Price, alarmed by the undercurrents she was sensing, asked Juliana directly, "Are you implying an inappropriate relationship with Dr. Roth?" Juliana dissolved into tears, unable to articulate a coherent denial. Ethan stormed after Dr. Roth, cornering him in the corridor. Some staff members witnessed that confrontation. "You're going to pay for this," Ethan hissed, jabbing a finger in Dr. Roth's chest. Dr. Roth whispered, a shaky attempt at deflection. "You don't understand." "It's not what you think," Ethan glared back. "I think you violated my wife, broke your professional oath, and destroyed my marriage. That about right?" Dr. Roth put up a hand, ironically using his calm therapist voice. "Look, I'll step away from this case entirely. Juliana can see someone else. I never meant to cause you harm." His words in that moment felt like an insult, an attempt to minimize a betrayal that tore Ethan's world apart. Ethan stepped back, forcing his anger into a tight knot inside his chest. "I'm not done with you," he muttered. Then he turned on his heel, returning to the therapy room just long enough to grab his coat and usher Juliana out. The entire building vibrated with tension. Staffers pretended not to notice, but they exchanged worried glances. Dr. Price's session notes reflect that she felt powerless and blindsided. In the car, Ethan refused to talk to Juliana. She kept whispering, "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry," while tears blurred her vision of the streetlights. But he was a statue, hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles looked like they might burst through his skin. He ended up dropping her off at home, then driving into the night. What started as a furious car ride became hours of circling the city, replaying every sign he'd missed, every moment she'd returned from therapy with that strangely lit expression. By the time he parked at a deserted lot outside a 24-hour convenience store, the sky was draped in pre-dawn darkness. Anger and heartbreak coiled inside him like a serpent. "He used her," Ethan growled to his reflection in the rearview mirror. Yet he couldn't ignore the other side. Was Juliana truly just a victim, or had she chosen to be with Dr. Roth? The swirl of blame turned chaotic. Searching for a place to land, he pulled out his phone and tapped through old photos of their happier times. Then, with a surge of adrenaline, he scrolled to Dr. Roth's contact information in the clinic's directory. For a moment, he contemplated sending a threatening message, but he stopped himself, uncertain of the next step. Another wave of denial washed over him. Maybe they could fix this. Maybe once the affair was exposed, Dr. Roth would be forced out of her life. He felt sick to his stomach, realizing he was rationalizing. How could he share a bed with her after what she'd done? In the following days, Ethan avoided contact with Juliana, except for basic logistical exchanges. She apologized repeatedly. She insisted that Dr. Roth had manipulated her vulnerabilities. "I love you, Ethan," she tried to say. "I was in a dark place. I wasn't thinking clearly." He listened, eyes dull, jaw set. At work, his performance began to slip as he fought to keep from exploding at random triggers. Meanwhile, the Aspenwood Clinic circulated an internal memo that Dr. Roth was taking a temporary leave of absence to address personal matters. Patients were discreetly reassigned to other therapists. The official story was that Dr. Roth had a family emergency. No one mentioned the scandal that lurked just beneath the surface, but in whispered conversations by the water cooler, rumors ran rampant. Just when everyone believed the dust might settle, Ethan discovered a phone bill showing a series of late-night calls between Juliana and Dr. Roth. The realization that they were still in contact shattered the fragile hope that any resolution could come peacefully. That night, in a confrontation behind their closed bedroom door, Ethan shouted, "You're still speaking to him?" Juliana, eyes wide, stammered, "He said he was worried about me. He wanted to make sure I was okay." Ethan laughed bitterly. "You realize how twisted that is? The man who caused your mental wreckage is checking in on you?" But she only sobbed, "I'm sorry. I'm so confused right now." The next morning, she packed a small bag and went to stay with Lauren, needing space from Ethan's intensity. He stood in the hallway, watching her leave without a fight. If heartbreak could be tangible, it would have formed a crack in their floorboards. For days, he barely left the house, losing himself in a haze of half-drunk coffees and half-smoked cigarettes on the back porch, brooding over the injustice of it all. When the flames finally erupted at the Aspenwood Clinic weeks later, the official timeline would show that Ethan had purchased several gallons of gasoline from a nearby station, paying in cash to avoid an obvious paper trail. Investigators discovered receipts in his car for lighter fluid and a cheap disposable lighter. He had texted Juliana a series of furious messages that morning, though none explicitly spelled out his deadly intent. "I can't live like this. I can't stand the thought of you with him," one message read. Another threatened, "He won't get away with this." But even then, few would have predicted he'd commit such a brutal act. Arson was not a typical crime of passion. It required a certain cold deliberation, a plan, the crossing of a line that's normally unthinkable. In interviews after the fact, Ethan would claim he only intended to scare them, to force them to face the consequences, but every detail of how he carried it out suggests a far darker resolve. On that fatal evening, Dr. Roth had secretly arranged for Juliana to meet him at the clinic after hours, claiming he needed to talk to her away from prying eyes. He still believed, in some twisted sense, that he cared for her, that maybe they could find a future together if she divorced Ethan. She arrived hesitantly, guilt pressing down on her. She even texted Loren, "I don't know if I should do this, but he says it's urgent." Dr. Roth led her in through a side entrance. At nearly the same time, Ethan's sedan was seen in the area, captured by a neighbor's security camera, circling the block with its headlights off. At 8:47 p.m., according to phone records, Juliana made a frantic call to Ethan that lasted only a few seconds. It went unanswered. She left a voicemail, "Ethan, please, I need to talk to you. I can't keep doing this." The rest was cut off by her sobs. Minutes later, Ethan pulled up behind the clinic, stepping out into the alley. He wore a hooded jacket, and in the trunk of his car he had the gasoline and the lighter fluid. The doors to the clinic were locked from the inside, but Dr. Roth had carelessly left a window open in the break room for some fresh air. Ethan pried it open further, sliding through. Security footage from inside the clinic, though partially obstructed, later showed him entering the hallway. He carried the gas can, creeping quietly, his expression rigid. Juliana and Dr. Roth were in one of the therapy rooms upstairs, deep in a heated conversation. They didn't hear him at first. He poured gasoline along the baseboards, soaking the carpet. He unscrewed a small container of lighter fluid and splashed it onto the walls, his hand trembling. Suddenly, Dr. Roth smelled the fumes. He opened the door to find Ethan standing in the hallway, lighter in hand, eyes blazing. "Ethan, what the hell are you doing?" Roth's voice registered panic. Juliana peeked out from behind him, shock draining the color from her face. Ethan glared. "Stay back. Don't come near me." He flicked the lighter, but it didn't catch at first. Roth lunged forward, trying to grab him, but Ethan kicked a side table in his way. The lighter flicked again, this time catching a small flame. Time seemed to freeze as the flame touched the gasoline-soaked carpet, igniting with a roar. The hallway turned into an inferno within seconds, flames licking at the walls, billowing thick black smoke. Juliana screamed, "Oh my God, Ethan, what are you doing?" He backed away, the roar of the fire reflected in his eyes, a mixture of rage and heartbreak contorting his face. "You took everything from me," he shouted, though the words were nearly drowned out by the roar of the flames. Dr. Roth tried to find a route around the fire, but the corridor was already engulfed. They retreated into the therapy room, the door slammed shut behind them. A staff member in a distant office heard the commotion, emerged to see the corridor ablaze, and sprinted out of the building, calling 911 in a panic. Ethan vanished through the break room window, stumbling into the alley, the smell of gasoline on his clothes. News broke almost immediately. By the time fire trucks arrived, the top floor was spewing flames. Witnesses flocked to the sidewalk, capturing the horrific scene on their phone. Inside, Dr. Roth and Juliana were trapped. They managed to pry open a small window, but the flames had spread to the roof. Smoke inhalation overtook them both. When firefighters finally got control of the blaze, the building had partially collapsed. They found the remains of two people, later identified through dental records as Dr. Marcus Roth and Juliana Caldwell. The city reeled in horror as the story took shape. People were stunned. How could a marriage meltdown end in such carnage? For days, the local news reeled with footage of the burning clinic, the frantic 911 calls and interviews with tearful Aspenwood staff. The online tabloids had a field day with the salacious affair, labeling Dr. Roth a predatory therapist and painting Juliana as a tragic figure. In neighborhood chat groups, speculation ran rampant. Was Ethan a cold-blooded murderer, or had he snapped under extreme emotional distress? Authorities began a manhunt for Ethan, who fled the scene. He left behind a smattering of confused text messages to friends, saying only that he had done something irreversible. A portion of the city believed he might have taken his own life, unable to face what he'd done. But Ethan was spotted on traffic cameras heading out of town near a state highway. Days passed with no sign of him. The city collectively held its breath, waiting for the next development. Meanwhile, investigators combed through the wreckage, confirming accelerant use, reconstructing the final moments. Dr. Price, the couple's therapist who had unwittingly stood in the middle of this, was interviewed repeatedly by detectives. She explained how the tension had boiled over, how Ethan had confronted Dr. Roth in that corridor. She recounted the hateful fury in his eyes, struggling to maintain composure in front of the cameras. "I've counseled couples with deep betrayal before," she told a local news reporter, "but never anything that escalated to homicide. I didn't see it coming. I truly didn't." Aspenwood Clinic had to shut down its operations indefinitely, the building reduced to charred rubble. A single witness, a groundskeeper from a neighboring property, claimed he saw Ethan run out the back window, shouting to himself, "They deserved it." The groundskeeper later told police, "I was too scared to approach him. He looked like a man possessed." Within a week, Ethan Caldwell's face was plastered on wanted posters and digital bulletins. "Suspect at large," every alert read, cautioning the public not to approach if they spotted him. People debated on social media whether they would have done the same in his position, an uncomfortable question that revealed a morbid fascination with the extremes of betrayal and heartbreak. But beyond the tabloid sensationalism, a real tragedy lay in the ashes. 2 lives ended, an entire clinic staff traumatized, and a man on the run from the law. Family friends mourned Juliana's death, lamenting that no matter her mistakes, she didn't deserve to die. Others bemoaned the betrayal and exploitation Dr. Roth represented, acknowledging that though his professional ethics were grievously compromised, he too was a victim of lethal rage. The complexity of blame swirled in the air, haunting everyone who knew the couple. The official autopsy confirmed that both had died from smoke inhalation before the flames consumed them. In other words, they spent their final moments clawing for oxygen, pinned by a slow, choking horror. For the public, the news coverage painted a tragic portrait of a twisted love triangle. Networks replayed the shaky phone footage of the blazing building, overlaying it with old pictures of Ethan and Juliana in happier times. Reporters hounded Aspenwood staff, who mostly avoided commenting, citing advice from their lawyers. Everyone demanded accountability. How had the clinic missed the glaring signs of Dr. Roth's boundary violations? Should the administration be charged with negligence? Local talk shows buzzed with these debates, but legally, the focus was on the prime suspect, who'd set the fire. And so the city braced for the moment Ethan Caldwell would be caught and brought to justice. All the while, Ethan drifted between motels, paying in cash, looking over his shoulder. Interviews with a grim-faced motel owner revealed a tall man matching Ethan's description had stayed for a single night, paying extra to avoid showing ID. Security footage later confirmed it was him. He left abruptly before sunrise, heading who knew where. Some wondered if he sought refuge with distant relatives or if he holed up in a backwoods campsite. The police tapped into every resource, but Ethan had planned his flight well enough to evade immediate capture. Still, guilt has a way of gnawing at even the most hardened hearts. Days turned into weeks, the city unsettled by the knowledge that a man capable of that kind of violence roamed free. Amid the swirling chaos, a local station scored an exclusive interview with Lauren, Juliana's best friend, who shared text messages and voicemails from Juliana leading up to that tragic night. The station aired a snippet of Juliana's voice. "I feel like I can't breathe in my own home. Roth says I should do what makes me happy, but Ethan is my husband. I'm so confused." Hearing her raw tone, the heartbreak behind those words, the city paused its collective condemnation. People realized Juliana was a woman caught in an emotional trap. She had felt genuine despair. Whatever lines she crossed, the biggest line of all was crossed by a man who took lethal revenge. The interview concluded with Loren's tearful statement. "I told her to take a break from therapy, but she said Dr. Roth made her feel safe. Now they're both gone. I can't wrap my head around it." 2 months after the fire, a break in the case emerged when a stolen license plate was traced to a remote cabin near the state border. Police discovered a disheveled, furious Ethan living off meager groceries. When the arresting officers burst through the cabin door, they found him slumped at a small table, half-empty bottle of whiskey in front of him, the corners of his eyes sunken with grief. A battered old laptop sat open, revealing that he'd been reading article after article about the arson. He offered no resistance, simply raised his hands in silent surrender as the cops pinned him to the floor. At the station, he gave a brief statement. "I didn't mean for them to die. I just wanted him to stay away from her," but his emotionless stare contradicted that sentiment. He was charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder along with aggravated arson. A wave of grim satisfaction swept through some corners of the community. "He's a monster," folks said, "and monsters belong behind bars." Others clung to the notion that heartbreak can drive a person to unimaginable extremes, though that softened no one's condemnation of the act itself. Months of legal proceedings followed, culminating in a high-profile trial. Courtroom transcripts revealed a tension as the prosecutor laid out the evidence piece by piece, painting Ethan as a calculating killer. They pointed to the receipts for gasoline, the text messages threatening Dr. Roth, and eyewitness testimony placing him at the scene. The defense tried to argue a crime of passion, temporary insanity triggered by the intense betrayal. They brought up the ethical violation committed by Dr. Roth, the vulnerability of Juliana's emotional state, and the catastrophic meltdown that overcame Ethan. Expert witnesses debated whether it was a momentary snap or a premeditated plan. Ethan sat stone-faced, occasionally burying his face in his hands when the coroner recounted the final moments of those trapped in the flames. During one especially dramatic day, Lauren took the stand, recounting her phone call with Juliana on the day of the incident. She said she was meeting Dr. Roth to end things for good, Loren testified, tears flooding her eyes. She realized the affair was a terrible mistake. She wanted to fix her marriage. She needed closure. I truly believe she never intended to continue things with him. She was heading there to say goodbye. Loren's testimony added a tragic nuance. Perhaps in a cruel twist, Juliana had chosen the moment to break free from Dr. Roth, only for Ethan's arrival to seal everyone's fate. The police never found any conclusive proof that Dr. Roth intended to run away with Juliana or that she intended to remain with him. Ultimately, the only people who knew the exact dynamic in that therapy room were the two who died in the fire. The trial's turning point came when the prosecution entered the security footage from inside the clinic, showing Ethan igniting the fire. The grainy images, especially the raw hatred on Ethan's face, drove home a chilling reality. Whatever heartbreak he'd felt, it had crystallized into a lethal intention at that moment. The defense squirmed under the weight of that visual evidence. They pivoted toward emotional pleas, urging the jury to consider the turmoil behind Ethan's actions, the betrayal by a medical professional. He was a husband driven past his breaking point, the defense attorney argued. But in the cold logic of the law, heartbreak is not an excuse for murder. The jury's verdict was almost a foregone conclusion. Weeks later, the city erupted in conversation again when the jury returned a guilty verdict on 2 counts of second-degree murder and 1 count of first-degree arson. The judge handed down a hefty sentence, ensuring Ethan Caldwell would spend decades in prison. Outside the courthouse, reporters jostled for position, capturing footage of a gaunt, hollow-eyed Ethan being escorted by officers. One reporter managed to call out, "Do you have anything to say about what you did?" Ethan paused, lips parted as if to speak, but no words emerged. He simply shook his head, as though he too was grappling with the enormity of his actions. From inside a police van, he stared through the barred window, at a world that had become unrecognizable. The final official statement he gave to the court was, "I wish I could take it back. I wish I could undo everything." But there was no going back. The tragedy was complete, leaving behind scorched walls, ash-blackened memories, and a trail of unanswered questions about love, ethics, and the destructive power of unchecked rage. In the aftermath, the Aspenwood Clinic quietly dissolved. Another therapy practice eventually bought the property, tore down the charred remains, and built a new center for mental wellness. A small memorial plaque stands on the sidewalk dedicated to the victims of that dreadful night. For some in the community, the plaque is a reminder of how easily ethics can slip, how quickly heartbreak can become violent. Those who pass by sometimes place flowers or notes. One note left anonymously read, "Love can make us do crazy things, but this was beyond." For many, the memory of the flames is still too raw, the blackened silhouette of the building forever etched in their minds. Within legal circles, the case stirred conversations about the safeguarding of therapeutic boundaries. Administrations across the state reinforced training and revised guidelines, emphasizing the catastrophic danger of crossing professional lines. The story became a reference point in lectures on transference and countertransference, a chilling example of what happens when emotional boundaries disintegrate. Of course, the broader public soon latched on to fresh scandals and stories, yet every so often, the footage of that building engulfed in flames resurfaces, typically accompanied by a voiceover recapping the lurid details. A man undone by his wife's affair, a therapist whose ethics disintegrated, and a suburban nightmare that escalated into homicide. The headline never fails to grab attention. Man found out his wife was sleeping with her therapist, so he burned down the clinic with them inside. People click, watch, gasp, and retell the story as a lurid bit of suburban legend. In hushed conversation, some might say, "If I'd been in his position, I'd be furious too. But to kill them?" Others grapple with the question of whether Dr. Roth deserved legal consequences for exploiting a vulnerable patient, though few would claim he deserved such a violent end. The moral lines remain blurry, overshadowed by the final act of horror. As for Ethan Caldwell, he's locked up in a state penitentiary, serving a lengthy sentence. Early in his incarceration, he allegedly kept to himself, spent hours in the prison library reading about psychology, therapy ethics, even arson laws. Some prisoners claimed he barely spoke except when forced to. After a few years, a rumor circulated that he was writing letters addressed to Juliana, letters that obviously would never be received, letters in which he begged her for forgiveness. The authenticity of those rumors was never verified, but it fit the tragic pattern of a man unable to escape his own guilt. Occasionally, a tabloid might request an interview hoping for a sensational quote. He never responds. The last time he allowed any kind of public statement was at his sentencing. He uttered, "I lost control, I loved her," words that ring hollow against the enormity of what he did. In the psychological autopsies that follow such tragedies, experts propose a range of theories. Maybe this was a perfect storm of heartbreak, mental health neglect, and boundary violations. Maybe Ethan had pre-existing rage issues. Maybe Juliana wasn't just a victim. Maybe she manipulated her own vulnerabilities and let Dr. Roth cross a line they both knew was forbidden. The truth is probably more layered than any single explanation, but none of those debates bring back the lost lives or undo the trauma inflicted on everyone touched by the case. Over time, the name Ethan Caldwell has become shorthand for the destructive capacity of betrayal and the horrifying extremes of revenge. In that sense, his story has indeed become a cautionary tale. Whenever people sense jealousy or heartbreak brewing among their friends or neighbors, someone might whisper, "Let's hope this doesn't turn into another Caldwell situation," referencing an unthinkable act that no one wants to see repeated. It's a reminder that heartbreak, if not processed or confronted responsibly, can fester into something lethal. For all the rage that ignited the night of the fire, what truly lingers is a sense of sorrow. Sorrow for a marriage undone, for the exploitation by a charismatic but unethical therapist, and for 2 lives lost in the inferno. The aftermath stands as a permanent reflection of how quickly human emotions can spiral past reason when the foundations of trust and ethics are shattered. Ironically, each year around the date of the fire, the local news might run a small segment rehashing the events, featuring a snippet from that infamous phone footage of the burning clinic. They interview community leaders who speak about the importance of mental health care, about the line that must never be crossed between therapist and patient, about the critical need for better emotional support. Some of Juliana's old friends hold a small vigil, lighting candles in her memory. Loren usually shows up, tears glinting in her eyes, placing a single white rose by the plaque. She doesn't speak to reporters, having long since tired of the sensational coverage. She just bows her head in silence, as if in communion with her friend's restless spirit. Maybe she prays that the world can learn from this savage cautionary tale. Or maybe she just prays for peace, for a forgiveness that might never come. And so, life moves forward, shaped by the indelible scar of that night, holding on to the fleeting hope that such tragedies can be prevented when people recognize the magnitude of their choices and the cataclysmic potential of crossing lines that should remain inviolable.